with that, please welcome Andrew Keen. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Yeah, you've really set me up here So I've spoken at this event several times before. I think I should be officially or unofficially called your Chief Unhappiness Officer. In good Belgian fashion, I've come to ruin your afternoon before the evening celebrations. But actually, I got a couple of thoughts on happiness, or more than a couple of thoughts. A couple of immediate response to the presentation before about whether money makes you happy, or giving away your money makes you happy. I'm from Silicon Valley, so there's a particular libertarian twist to that, which I don't think was included in the presentation. What Silicon Valley multi-billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, although he's not really from Silicon Valley, what Elon Musk, Bill Gates, what they're all in the business of doing is giving away their money. There's a competition now to give away their billions of dollars with a twist. What Zuckerberg has done has created a clever, and I don't mean this necessarily in the most cynical way, although there are some cynical implications of this. What Zuckerberg has done is figured out a way to give away his money tax-free. So he is committed, I think. He's done the Warren Buffett, Bill Gates commitment of giving away, I think it's 90, 95, 99% of his wealth by the time he dies. But he's done it in a way that he won't have to pay tax to the government. So that's the Silicon Valley version of happiness, which I'm not sure if it makes me happy, but it's an interesting take on the notion of happiness and what it means to give away one's money. What also wasn't included in this is the idea of giving away one's money if one thinks it's the fruit of one's labor. I mean, if you pick up 500 euro on the street and give it away, I'm assuming there's a different kind of sense of happiness than if you actually earn that money. Whether Zuckerberg has really earned his 60 billion or whatever he has is another question. And my own response to the happiness, there was a gentleman at the back from Real Madrid, a smallish Spanish football team. I don't know how many English people are here. I grew up as hardcore Spurs fan, season ticket holder, went to the 67 final, and have had 40 years of utter despair because they've been a very, very average team dominated by Chelsea and Arsenal in London. So it sort of suited my miserable nature, made me good as a chief unhappiness officer. And in a weird, what's happened, unfortunately or unfortunately, over about the last 3 years, since a wonderful Argentine called Mauricio Pochettino has come to manage our team, is suddenly we've become one of the best teams in Europe. And in fact, as some of you will know, especially the gentleman from Madrid, a couple of weeks ago we beat Madrid 3-1. And we're top of our group and they can't catch us up. And what's interesting, and maybe this is again another empirical study for happiness, is what happens when you follow a team that has prided itself on its failure? What happens when that team changes? How does that change your notion of happiness and unhappiness and pessimism and all that sort of thing? So that's another one. That's another empirical study for our academic friends. What I would say about myself, as apart from being the chief unhappiness officer, I'm a cheerful pessimist, which distinguishes me from most Americans. Most Americans are miserable optimists. One or two perhaps accepted at my table, but generally Americans are horribly optimistic, whereas British people pride themselves on their cheerful pessimism. So, you know, when we were on the Titanic, we sang as the ship went down. I assume so. Anyway, I better get on with and I don't usually have a presentation because I'm too lazy to make them. So what I've done is steal some slides from other people in this today. So does my smartphone make me happy? This was the first question we had. And 80% of you said yes. Does your smartphone make you happy? But it was the wrong kind of question, because when you ask about a smartphone, which I left on the table so that I wouldn't be distracted during this speech, I might have asked it slightly differently. I might have said to you, are you happy with the amount of time your children spend on their smartphone? How many of you are happy with that? And let's not use your archaic digital device. Let's do an analog show of hands here. How many of you are happy about that? So that's less than 80%, right? Shows the value of statistics. What's the famous phrase about statistics and lies? Well, let me rephrase it. Maybe I'm being a little unfair. Most of you didn't have a great deal of trust in Google and Amazon. But of course we know, or we should know, that I think it's something like 99 or 99% of the platform of our smartphones run on Apple and Google devices. Does that make us happy? Who's thrilled about that? Is there anyone from Google or Amazon, Google or Apple here? How many people are happy that there are only two American West Coast, actually Silicon Valley companies that control the entire digital mobile platform, the platform that Peter so brilliantly described, the dominant platform of our modern age? One gentleman at the back. Why? What are you so thrilled about, that there's only two choices? You mean you'd rather have just one? Well, the rest of you disagree. So the reality is that our smartphone kind of makes us happy. It depends how the question's asked. As always, that's why I'm always so suspicious of statistics. It really depends. We know what we're asking. And we like the idea of our smartphone. I think we even have a smartphone here, yeah. And actually, it was interesting when I was listening to all this. There's the big Apple store over the road. Next time, we should do the event in there. On the platform, right? And we always use Google. So it depends how we use it. What I would say, again, throwing out an idea here, a general idea that may not be as quantitative as some of our academic friends would like, these things make us happy when we feel empowered. So the smartphone is amazing. It allows us to connect with people around the world. It allows us to do our job. But we don't like it when it's disempowering. We don't like it, for example, when we don't have any real choice as consumers. We don't like it when our kids are addicted to these devices, literally, like a drug or an alcohol. We don't like it when we're addicted. We don't like it when we're distracted. We had that interesting exchange at the beginning. George argued that the three reasons why the cell phone allowed him to work harder. I mean, maybe it does in a sense. We all use Google. It's very effective. But at the same time, it's incredibly distracting. What I would like, though, to think beyond is merely this as a consumer device. It's more than that. And I think Esko put it brilliantly, put it very provocatively. He said, the iPhone is the new factory. So think about that when you think about whether or not your smartphone makes you happy. Are you happy in this new factory? Because we're all kind of working in it, whether we like it or not. We're all contributing our data. These smartphones are indeed, as Esko said, the new factory, the early 21st century factory, the equivalent of the kind of factories that existed in Brussels and Manchester and the other northeastern European cities in the 19th century that drove the Industrial Revolution. So we're ambivalent about these new factories. We're not sure. They empower us and they disempower us. They make us feel strong. They seem to be customer-centric. And yet, they're also very disempowering. They make us feel small. They make us feel as if we're being watched all the time. They reflect the surveillance economy, where our phones and people like Eric Schmidt and some of the other visionaries in Silicon Valley say it openly. Our smartphones know us better than we know ourselves. Our academic friend suggested that himself. These smartphones know everything about us. They can tell us what we want before we know it ourselves. But does that make us happy? Does that make us feel empowered? Does that make us feel human, whatever that word is? And as Mikhail said, what does it mean to be human in the digital age? Means being empowered, feeling in control of these machines rather than the machines being in control of us, feeling as if we're enslaved to these devices. We can't switch them off. We have to work 24 hours a day. We're addicted to our updates and our feeds and the photographs from other people on Instagram. So being human means being empowered. And we're confused with this. The gentleman from Forrester, who isn't here anymore, so I can be really rude about him, he had the nerve to tell you guys, your companies are all going out of business. He didn't even make any exceptions. Facebook, Amazon, everyone apparently is going out of business. All of you are being swept away by this digital tsunami. Maybe he's right. But there's a great deal of confusion, I think, and hypocrisy here. Because the man from Forrester told us that you have to rethink everything and redo everything. He talked about customer aware, all these big shifts. What did he say? He said, we're going from perfect to fast. Perfect to fast. But of course, what he was doing was presenting in a perfect way. He had a number of slides which he, if not read out, certainly built his thing around. He wasn't particularly fast. I'm the fast guy, and I'm the chief unhappiness officer. So what I've tried to do anyway is develop a fast presentation, which means, in other words, that it's profoundly imperfect. So ESCO introduced us to two great slides, both in 1932. Friedman wrote his book suggesting that 2007 was a pivotal moment. Americans always think that they're first in history and that all moments are pivotal and never before happened. But of course, as ESCO reminds us, and indeed as Peter reminded us, we're all still subjected to historical forces. History, to repeat Marx, is repeating itself. What we're going through today is very much like what we went through in the Industrial Revolution in terms of this profound disruption, this confusion of happiness and unhappiness, this sense of on the one hand we're being empowered and on the one hand we're being disempowered. Imagine we were doing this conference in 1932 and we had these fancy technologies, and I'd have said to you, does industrialization make you feel empowered? That's the same question that we ask about digital. Does industrialization make you feel empowered? The new streetlights, the new automobiles? In a sense, of course, it does. And on the other hand, we'd all be working in the factories. We'd all be subjected to the new rich, the new profound inequalities, the challenges to unemployment. So what indeed we're living through, as ESCO suggested, is a return to history, not the end of history, which Francis Fukuyama so proudly boasted about before history clearly returned. We're back to where we started. We're back with a profound change. And most of all, we're back to a change where technology is changing the world, and it's also changing us. And it's both simultaneously empowering and disempowering us. Henry Ford in 1932 at Ford Motor Company was simultaneously empowering and disempowering us. He was empowering us with our new motor vehicles, like the iPhone, which was the equivalent in 1932. And at the same time, Ford was a dominant company. Ford controlled labor. Ford changed the nature of work, and so on and so forth. What happened in 1932? If Thomas Friedman could make a big deal about 2007, I could make a big deal about 1932. Now, my friend Pierre, in his introduction, said we're returning to a brave new world. And I assume he was talking about Huxley's Brave New World, his great, or perhaps troubling, dystopian novel, which, as it happens, coincidentally, or perhaps more than coincidentally, was published in 1932. In the depths of the Depression, at a time of dramatic inequality, a feeling of alienation, of technology controlling us. And that's what that book is about. It's a brilliant book. It's about a technological addiction. It's about a government that controls its people through technology as drugs. It's about a world where work has been done away with and no one quite knows what to do with themselves. It's a world of a small, unaccountable elite who lie to everyone. It's a world of deep hypocrisy. And in many ways, we've returned to that now. It doesn't mean that we're completely screwed. It doesn't mean that we're Luddites. It doesn't mean that the solution, as it was in 1932, was to close the factories. Today, the solution is not to smash the iPhone or break down the Apple Store or loot the Apple Store. But it's important to remember that this is a big deal. This is not a joke. In 1932, when Huxley's book came out, he warned people about the contradictions of hypocrisy of a ruling class. And we know what happened and Americans don't always know, but you Europeans know what happened in the 1930s. When you get this confusion, when you get the clear hypocrisy of a new ruling class, when people are exploited and at the same time they're told they're being empowered, which is what Silicon Valley is telling everyone while laughing all the way to the bank, you get extremely angry people. Now, we know which ways that anger was channeled in the 1930s. Today, we already have Trump. We could conceivably have a lot worse. So this is a very serious situation. The digital revolution is profoundly troubling, and the inconsistencies, the hypocrisies of this new age are one of the things that are driving this new anger. It's no coincidence that both the radical left in America and the radical right, whether it's Steve Bannon or Elizabeth Warren, although I'm not sure how hard left she is, they only agree about one thing, that the problem is Silicon Valley, that the problem is Google and Apple, that the problem are these news monopolists. Now, I'm neither on the extreme left or the extreme right. I certainly am no fan of Bannon, and I'm ambivalent about Warren. But it is important to understand that Silicon Valley is the new Wall Street and is also in danger of becoming the new object of anger and hatred. So when Peter says Silicon Valley gets it, I hope he's right. In a sense, they do, but in a sense, they live in fantasy land. And whether they have 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years to get it even better, they better start getting it soon, because otherwise the consequences will be very bad. So we have the same situation. We had Peter had this great slide, 1928, 2007, Brave New World, Brave New Digital World. We have the same income inequalities. We have the same dominance of the 1%. We have the same, and I really like this, if it ever comes up. Click one more. You see, this is what happens when you steal other people's slides. You have the same inequalities. This in particular is particularly concerning, where we have supposedly empowerment, blah, 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 but the reality is productivity going up, all that wealth going to Silicon Valley, a tiny group of technologists who control the new means of production, everyone else's family income going down. That's the contradiction, the hypocrisy. That is the root, not of happiness, but of unhappiness of our modern age. And that's the danger in the way it gets channeled into politics. Peter's right about the value of platforms. The platforms are the new reality, for better or worse. We can't return to the factories of the 19th or 20th century. But those platforms need to be changed. In my book, in the upcoming book, Fix the Future, I suggest 5 tools which we've always used throughout history to fix these things. Now, the crisis isn't identical, but many of the themes, from inequality to the threat of unemployment, to surveillance, to technological addiction, we're faced with the same things that we confronted in the 19th century and the industrial age, and we got beyond those, mostly. We never reached utopia, and we never will reach utopia. But what we did was confront them through the 5 tools we've always had in history. Technology is not the solution to these problems. There is no app to fix the future. Silicon Valley may pretend there's one, they may try and sell you one, but there isn't. That doesn't mean that the future is a Luddite one. It doesn't mean that we suddenly go back and live in a cave and use candles once again. But the point about the future is it gets solved with the very tools that we've always used. Now, as I suggested to you, happiness is bound up with a sense of empowerment. The reason why there's so much unease, anxiety, is we feel out of control. We feel as if there are all these new forces, whether they're Silicon Valley companies, whether it's the mechanized office, whether it's AI, whether it's virtual reality. And by the way, virtual reality isn't new. It was in Brave New World. In fact, it was central in Brave New World. So none of this technology is really very new. AI is, in a sense, new, but it's not going to result in us becoming enslaved to technology because it never will have a conscience. The point about these tools that I come up with in the book is we've used them time and time again, and we need to return to them. So we need regulation. The way to confront Silicon Valley, in part, is through the work of people like Margaret Vestager in Brussels. One chapter in my book is dedicated to a series of conversations I have with her. She's standing up to the four, the famous 4, the 5 horsemen, whatever we want to call them. Someone has to, and she is. And it's always been the role of government in part. I'm not suggesting some sort of Stalinist solution. I'm not suggesting we ban these companies. But the role of regulation is critical. The role of regulation is critical because it creates an equal playing field. And the only way to create real innovation in the future is by enabling smaller, more innovative companies. The Googles and the Apples and the Facebooks of the world have become bloated. They're no longer innovative. They're monopolists. Monopolists don't benefit society. Peter Thiel suggests they do. Peter Thiel celebrates monopolies. But he's wrong. Society needs innovation. And there's an intimate relationship, as there always has been, in terms of tools between innovation and regulation. We need civic action. It's not enough to just say, well, whatever will be, will be. It's not enough to just give up. In my book, I contrast 2 kinds of Moore's law. The first is Gordon Moore's law about the doubling of computer processing speed every 18 months, which is the engine, the driver of this revolution, and another Moore's law, Thomas Moore's law. Thomas More being the author of Utopia, the great 16th century political fantasy. In Moore's Utopia, More makes human agency the great driver of human progress. And he does it through civic action. So we need more civic groups. We need them to improve the platform economy. So Uber is a great company in some ways, but they're not treating their workers properly. They don't give them rights. They take the same kind of advantage of them as 19th century capitalists did. So we need lawyers to go to American or European courts and protect the rights of Uber drivers. We need well-intentioned citizens as well. We need citizens and consumers to act. It's not just about empowering consumers. It's not just about giving consumers cheaper and cheaper goods. Consumers drove the Industrial Revolution. They made it better. Take the example of food. In the middle of the 19th century, food was dreadful. It was of very, very low quality. Similarly to the kinds of digital products that exist today, like Facebook, which are deeply exploitative. Over the last 100 years, consumers have demanded better quality food. They've driven the appearance of companies like Whole Foods. Now, we know that Whole Foods was acquired by Amazon, which is in itself problematic. But it shows the power of the consumer to shape the future. Again, agency, power in response to these faceless technologies. And finally, we need more education. We can't just shove everything onto the teachers or parents. But the way to respond to this crisis, as in the industrial age, is through education, through improving people's understanding of the possibilities of this technology, and above all else, educating them in what it means to be human. Mikhail asked me to be optimistic. I am optimistic for one reason. Computers can't replicate us. Now, the guy from Forrester talked about empathy as if it was some sort of commodity. It isn't, of course. What empathy is what it means to be intrinsically human. Computer algorithms, AI will never learn to be human. As someone suggested, AI will never acquire its own consciousness. There's no gray area in AI. We shape AI. Programmers determine how it thinks. There is no dystopian final moment where the computers walk down the street and they have consciousness and they enslave us. That's not the way things work outside Hollywood. The reality, though, is it's going to take a lot of work from us collectively. We need to roll up our sleeves, as we did during the Industrial Revolution. It took 100 years to do away with some of the most profound injustices, whether it's ESCOs, kids working, child labor, whether it's terrible pollution, and some of these problems have yet to be solved. So we need to confront these problems now. They won't go away. They won't be fixed by an app. They won't be fixed by large Silicon Valley companies. They'll be fixed, as I said, by my 5 tools, by regulation and innovation and consumer choice and citizen activity and education. And that's why I am, in spite of being the Chief Unhappiness Officer of Mikhail's conference, that's why I am optimistic, because we've done it before and we will do it again. And this is not a unique moment. If we're able to think historically, that will give us confidence. If we believe that this is the first time this has ever happened and we are sort of mesmerized into thinking there's nothing we can do, then we collectively as the people lose. But if we roll up our sleeves as we've done historically and work on these problems and come up with better platforms that are fairer, that aren't just controlled by tiny companies, making multi-billionaires out of people who just happen to show up at the right time, then we can fix the future. And I will unfortunately be a positive optimist. Thank you.